And I think what is also different is that this collaboration or that fight for rural areas should then also be based in reciprocity. So whereas certainly in neo-endogenous development, the idea is, okay, you need resources, I will give them to you, I will assist you. Maybe that was also still a little bit in nexogenous development. We need to reconnect. I think now we need to understand that as we all depend on the vitalization of rural areas, as there is interdependence, what happens needs also to be based in reciprocity. So we need to recognize that interdependence, we need to respect each other's needs and make sure. So if you bring me energy, I have to invest in your services. If you maintain clear air or a good soil, I need to be ready to pay for the cost that entails, because it's also in my interest that this soil is good, that the air is clean. So I think for rural development policy, this means that we need to reinvest in what is the fundament of rural vitality, and that is basic services, for instance. So we need to recognize basic needs, and we need to assure them. We need to redefine and revalorize rural products to recognize the real value of what is produced and be ready to pay for that. And we should not utilize the rural areas for our pleasure, but we need to regenerate it in our basis, because it's all a shared concern for our future. So in a buzzword, I think what we need to reestablish is a sense of a collective based in interdependence, reciprocity, and synergy. And that, I think, means that we still have to go a step further from nexogenous to what is also called relational. It's not just interaction, it's the dynamic of the relation. And rural development, because rural development is not produced in places, the problems settle in places, but the problems are produced elsewhere. And they are part of this dynamic of centralization and peripheralization. And although initiatives can mitigate the effects and play a very important role, they on their own are unable to maintain vital rural areas. And in order to understand what is happening, we have to zoom in and zoom out, and we have to unravel this moving relational web. Thank you for your interest.
Thank you.
I have actually also a present for you, because it was our anniversary. Actually, it was last year, 75, but because of COVID, we had it this year, and we produced a book, and a lot of what I was telling you is based also in a chapter in the book, a reflection on rural development and place-based development. Here is the link, so you can download it, it's free, but I brought one for you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. So, let's begin with Paul and Federica.
Thank you. Yeah, former collective.
about it later, but we visited this local hub, Methodology, a few months back, and it really fits this because it's like it's this kind of, it's more than just a place, but it has these connections with outside of it, but these connections are still because of the place.
Yeah.
So I find it very interesting.
Okay, so I will also make a comment.
It's uncritical.
No.
Yeah, please.
Yeah, actually, I have a critical comment on the example you brought as like a civic initiative, because at the beginning you said about the urban colonization, and I'm doubting, like I'm asking myself, how can we stop or prevent this colonization in these civic initiatives? And I think in this sense it makes a lot of sense to try to provide educational opportunities also for the locals, so that they are maybe coming together, the farmers and the rural dwellers, not for fighting against someone, but for collaborating with someone. Like I think this is really crucial, because sometimes we like leave behind also the rural dwellers in terms of education opportunities and so on. So I feel like to prevent, I don't know, maybe you can also comment on that, like what should we take care, like consider in order to prevent this urban colonization from the outside. And also when you were saying about the relational development and the nexogenous development, of course networks are less, produce less fragmentation and like more cohesion, because it's like a net, but also there are some more dense network and some less dense network, and how can we maybe produce more knots and nodes in rural areas to make them more dense and like to produce more cohesion in these areas. I think maybe collaborative working spaces play a big role in this, like act as a intermediate, not institution, but intermediate actor between urban and rural, I don't know, knowledge workers and local workers. And also another thing that I would like to ask you is, what do you think about agricultural workers, agricultural sector as a knowledge-intensive sector? I mean, sometimes when we speak about collaborative working spaces, we think, okay, we focus more on knowledge workers, but what about consider farmers as knowledge, like bringer of knowledge, of their rural knowledge, of agricultural knowledge? Maybe if we kind of move the focus on this, we can include them much better in our projects, in our discussions, because like of course these topics are so interesting and for us researchers, but then in the end people on the ground have to solve very concrete problems and challenges, so how to really help them in reality. That's my...
Yeah. Let me see where to start. What you see at the moment in many places in the world, I would say, is really a disconnection between rural areas and urban areas, and then not the rural areas close to the city, but the more really rural. Yeah. And that is not necessarily a question of infrastructure. It may also be a question of roads and train connections, but it's also a disconnect at the mental or political level. A lot of national governments are urban governments. They are responsible for the rural areas, but they think because most of the people in the government are urban as well, so they think from their urban interest without even recognizing that it's an urban interest. And they talk about the rural areas, they talk about the farmers, they have to do this and they have to. The same image is from the other side. So a lot of rural areas think they decide for us. They don't know us. They are different. So there is an othering process from both sides. And of course that's also partly based on evidence, you could say, but it makes it also very difficult to collaborate. Because what I see in a lot of rural areas is also they want rural development, but they want to keep the areas as they are. So they don't necessarily want newcomers. And if newcomers are coming, okay, they should integrate and assimilate. Some of these areas and farmers have also developed a distrust to people who want to come to help them, because the people come with their own interests. So they want to know things from me, because then you can write your thesis. But how does it help me? So there you also need to think in terms of reciprocity. What is it that you can give back? What is it that you come with? If you want to help them, what is it that they want? What is it that they need? And that is very difficult as a PhD, but it's very important in terms of general dynamics. What you see, this dialogue between farmers and rural residents is seldom occurring. In my experience, that's also because you have a discussion about the quality of rural life and basic service, etc. That's a different discussion than the one about agriculture. And farmers generally do not take part in the discussion about basic service because they argue about agricultural politics with the Ministry of Agriculture and the Farm Union, etc., and not at the local level. So it does not, that's also why I thought it's so novel if a pharmacist invites other business in to talk about what they have in common. I know about another initiative, also in the Netherlands, where villagers and farmers took the initiative to discuss and to say, so how can we, because we don't, so their rural residents says, we don't want our farmers to be bought out, to lose their farms. We want the farms here. It's our, yes, it's our land, it's our community. But that has never been done. So, and they, by way of their region, got money to hire like a mediator or a trainer who would help them, facilitator, that's the best word, to together organize discussions and a plan what then to do. Because it's not so easy. So they have shared interests, but not all interests are shared. And you need to figure out what that cohesion or co-living then means at the now at the very local level. Because at the national level, and I have been part of a commission about the use of land in the Netherlands, they talk about the rural areas as empty space and agricultural land. So here we can do this, and there is nobody living there. And I felt like this repeat, but there are people living there. Yes, there are people living there. Yeah, but they are farmers. No, they're not all farmers. There are all kind of people. They are the same people because it's farmers and people who very, very traditional ideas. I think there are lots of people. There are lawyers. There are accountants. They have construction firms. They have a shop. There are loads of teachers, nurses, etc. Just like in the city. Actually, the most agricultural workers are close to the Hague in the center because that's where we have horticulture. But they didn't know that, so there are very strange ideas on both sides. And I think we need to, and that's why I try to encourage this idea of this is our shared land. We need to, it matters to all of us what happens with the land, and we need to think about that, but in fairness. Not in just deciding, I will take this land, I will take that land. And of course, this initiative of our land is maybe even colonization in the true sense of the word, because I buy the land and then use it as I wanted to. see, and that's true. But what it does encourage is this idea that it's our shared responsibility and also our shared, that we need to overcome this polarization or consideration. This is agriculture and this is city. When it comes to knowledge, yes, I think that differs a lot per country, probably. And per region and per sector, probably, because we have many highly educated farmers nowadays. Certainly in the bigger farms, in the very small farms, that might be different, and it might also depend on age, sector, age, and region, I would say. What this agricultural innovation, AIP thing, with the agricultural innovation.
I forgot.
I've got the abbreviation, but it's like
agricultural innovation partnerships
or partnerships, exactly.
Yes.
That's what the European Union has organized, and actually in a way also it becomes mandatory for scientists to participate in those partnerships, because what they want to guarantee is that the scientific knowledge is shared directly. So in the sense of I have knowledge and I bring it there, but also in the sense of together with farmers discuss what kind of knowledge do you actually need. And the theory is perfect. I don't know how well it works in practice. Yeah. And I don't know how accessible it is for all farmers. What I know is that it's very inaccessible for women farmers. All agricultural training is very inaccessible for women farmers because it's very male dominated and also very technology dominated. So I think there is certainly a lot of improvement possible. When it comes to you as PhDs going into rural areas, is what I always find very important is to be very modest and not to come there as I'm the academic and I know what you need to do, but to come in a very modest mode and be interested in what is happening there, and also to bring gifts in a way. Try to understand if there is anything you can do in return, and that can be, and also to build up relations of trust, and that the things you can bring can be very small. And I remember when I was doing research among women farmers, and I met this farmer who was very defensive in the beginning and very distrustful, and then we got to talk, and I came back and I learned that she was very interested in conserving zucchini. So that was her hobby. Some rather recipes that I found. So like finding this kind of personal connections, and that is a very individual example. Yeah, try to not only to bring your ideas, to ask well, what is it that you need, and I'm coming here to learn, and that needs to be honest, of course, not just a way of doing. And because lots of people, in the end, they like to talk about what they experience, and many people are also, that is also, so there is this idea of marginal areas are horrible places to live, and we need to revitalize them, we need to change them, and it's very often the idea from the center, and they might even start, oh no, now I recognize that we need to, these poor areas, we need to help them, and then I sort of, okay, now I did it wrong, because it's beautiful places. It's what people love to live there. They're attached to the area very often. They're proud of what they have, even though they might recognize that something needs to change. So that is also very important to acknowledge and to support this pride and attachment. And maybe you can do something, but come from interest and curiosity, and then readiness to do something in return. I don't know if that answers your question.
Probably we have a lot of questions here, and probably the big questions are, how crops can be a part
Oh, yeah.
this kind of place-based
Yeah.
rural development processes, or how to scan, this social innovation processes and things. But I quite like the way that you approach, the way that in these rural areas there is hidden value, a latent value. However, I think that if you look at the history of capitalism, there is always the core that extracts value out of these peripheral areas.
But
Either
very selective value.
yeah, physical resources, labor, and so on. So, and in the last few years, I think that, especially during the pandemic, we all wanted to go to rural areas. I mean, there are thousands of digital nomads coming to Greece to live in rural areas. So I'm wondering whether, if agriculture can be done as the way it was done in the 60s and the 70s, especially for Greece, because, we are not that competitive anymore to the market. So I think that if I look to the example of rural Greece, I think that these rural areas are becoming more and more spaces of consumption of the urban upper middle class, because it's not affordable. Working class cannot afford, to go out there and spend a week or 10 days or 15 days. So I'm wondering whether, this value-based approach can be somehow, manipulated or handled by community economies, by alternative economies. And I'm not talking about, putting an ethical dimension in it. I'm talking about, how we can really give the power to people in villages to do whatever they want. I mean, to unleash their dynamics, to unleash their values in different ways and in relations to urban areas. Shall we take some comments or questions? I think there was Ilaria first and then Mikel.
Thank you very much. Your presentation was very, very interesting. I have just a few comments, and it's interesting what you said when you referred to Castle, so talking about the importance of networks. But if I think about my background, I'm an urban and regional economist, so I think that the networks develop in places, because in these places there is entrepreneurship. So I agree with you that the development is nexogenous. So you have an endogenous development, like in the industrial districts area, where you have entrepreneurship, you have the culture, you have trust and so on, and their networks are easier to develop. Or you can have some exogenous hints that help also remote areas to develop. But I have the feeling that the issue is space. Space matters. It depends by the social capital in the space in order to develop networks. This is of course my knowledge, my formation of urban and regional economies. And then I have so I'm very much convinced about this exogenous development. This is also what I teach to my students now. So you have an endogenous development, but then you can have an exogenous measures that can help. And an exogenous measure can also be, like in the south-working, for instance, phenomenon in Italy, that people coming from the south of Italy, coming back to the south, that moved and migrated to the north of Italy, north of Europe, then started to do something in the remote, for instance, areas in the south. So this is exogenous, because it's true that they were coming from that areas, but from the environmental point of view, coastal areas in the south and so on. But what we don't know from the survey and what we are going to explore is whether and how these people, exogenous people, because have participated in the let's say in the initiatives addressed to the local context to improve the socio-economic context. We don't know about this yet. So there is also this risk, that these people are exogenous people that just want to stay in a nice place and don't care about the local development or creation, or the other way around. I don't know. I would like to know what is your feeling about the Netherlands.
So I would say networks are there always. So they are not built by entrepreneurs. You're always in a network. But of course, entrepreneurial activity can change the network or can strengthen relations, can make them more dense or more, can push places more to the center. But what I find interesting about the district economics is that it's actually a collective endeavor. It's not the singular entrepreneur, but it's a collective entrepreneurial, or it's a sub-network of entrepreneurs, which then changes the overall network. I would also think that people coming from the south, coming back to the south, I would consider examples of nexogenous because they come back, and also the example that you had of the investment in Messaloni is very interesting. In Japan, you have the option to pay part of your taxes to the place of origin as a kind of sense of loan, which is interesting. But and I think that I would like to know more about that. The example of the digital nomads is interesting, I find. Because they go, but what they do underline is that many of the places which seem to be abandoned and to be unworthy to investment are actually have a lot of value because and are attractive. They offer a quality of life. What is a bit at the same time morally a little bit complicated is that they offer a quality of life for those who do not depend on local employment. So they are what I call colonizers in the sense of bringing a lot of, and then they profit from the environment. Could they, yeah, it depends on, so they probably contribute to the local economy by renting houses and by buying food. So they do contribute to the economy in some sense. I would be very interested to know if they engage, because I'm afraid that they very often do not, because that's not what they are interested in. But they use the place. That's in the term utilize the environment for their own. Maybe they are not even aware of it. I don't know. So they are in a way also. So if we, and that points to very interesting also theoretical questions, because very often when we consider who is a resident is very often considered to be somebody who lives already a long time, and we have this idea that they live there forever, which is of course not true for all rural areas. And we tend to forget people who are not officially registered, which is true for migrant workers. It's certainly for illegal, but also for European migrant workers. Normally don't need to register, depending on how long they stay. It's not true for tourists, even if they come regularly or live there half of the year. And it's also probably not true for digital nomads. So they are there, they are actors, but they are never considered in terms of social innovation or civic initiative. So it's very interesting that you look into that. And I could imagine that it could be nurtured, that it could be developed. So that, for instance, if you start the creative hub, some of the digital nomads have probably knowledge that is of interest, which could be, I don't know, whatever they do. It could at least be some level of ICT and some language, but maybe also entrepreneurship or something else. But it doesn't happen a lot. But what I was doing a part of the Camino this summer in France, and there were these places, villages of 300 residents with at least 7 places where you could stay overnight for pilgrims. Which was interesting, I find, because of course it brings money and some of the people who would offer that were newcomers. So they came from elsewhere, bought an empty shop and started a hostel. So, and they made money out of it. I don't know to what, it changed because it brought newcomers, so it brought maybe also young families. But how to understand that is I don't know. So it's similar to a digital nomad. You're a nomad without digital. So you walk every day and you're passing by, but you're also an actor. And is that bringing profit? I know in this Kinesis project we have a case in Spain where the village was interested to consider to what extent it was worthwhile profiting from the pilgrims, or if it would change their village. So if they should organize more activities to attract them, because this is the Aragonese route where few people walk, but you could, could attract them and keep them, but that might also change. And then the question, what is it that you want as a rural villager? And I also find that, I'm not, intriguing. So of course it seems to be logic to think rural development, endogenous development should be about what people want. So in that sense, democratic, participatory, but do they own the village? Is it actually really totally up to them? Is it not also, could it not also be, and then for a village maybe it's easier, what about sustainable energy? Where to produce that? And of course, I would say, I don't have the right to decide where windmills are built, but on the other hand, I think we do need them. We need to change to other sources of energy, and we need to decide where to put them. Can then every rural resident say, no, not here? Is that their fundamental right? What about then our collective interest of sustainable energy? Or has every farmer the right to decide whether or not to use pesticides because that's his business? I don't think so. So there are very difficult political and moral questions, ethical questions, to decide who has the right to define needs and to make sure that they are realized.
Okay, I think that we have
Here's a kind of
time
question,
for
but I
two
don't.
more questions from
Yeah.
Mikel.
I have a comment and a question. Like a comment building on what you were saying now and what Syros was saying, that all this quantification and somehow mercantilization of the services, that there are solutions that feel right within the current context, but I'm very wary of, because I feel like you always lose with that in that game. You will never, you save grounds for Google and Google will buy. You can quantify the services women are creating, but you will never be able to quantify every single thing. And do we want that? And is that a game that? So at the end of that, like, how did we change the perspective of this? Although I understand that there is a short-term reimplementation of these kind of approaches. And also, like what you're saying right now, and actually it kind of even within, I mean, I don't know the specificities of the initiative that you mentioned, which sounds very good, but it's also the people about owning the land, the common owned land. That people were involved into deciding whether they wanted a data center or not, and deciding whether that was a need or it was terrible. And because that can also be perceived as a colonization from the environments, urban, from the city that are consuming all this data, but they don't want, and it can be even very cynical, right? And I've experienced myself all this like super complexity and going into the question of this complexity of urban areas need to stay the way they are, but they are already lost. And I'm thinking a lot about Spain, where I'm from. They need regeneration. Like there are places where they're already in a cycle that it cannot just be kept. It needs to be regenerated. And in order to regenerate it, you need new people. And a lot of times that people is not the people from the town that locals would like to see. You know, the kids of the kids, whatever. And a strong opposition or pushback and a cultural conflict between people coming in, whether the best intentions of the world. You know, you will never ever be a local. Maybe you keep if you have a son born in the place, etc. So my question is, and their working spaces fit, and that is actually I'm interested in my own research. What do you consider that, setting aside digital nomads, what I think is a different thing, and not talking about the suburban, close to the city processes, but this counter-urban migration of knowledge workers, neo-rurals, retirees, retired people, etc., fit, how much they can contribute to this, what are the key leverages to actually not end up creating a divided society where you have the locals and the rich, arrogant, urbanized that come to do, and do you think that collaborative working spaces can have a fit there, or do you know interesting experiences, or how do you envision the future in the long term with all these changes?
Yeah, again, it's there are different realities. So I think there are places where with urban newcomers, and very often in the Netherlands, very often retired people who integrated perfectly well, who were attracted by this sense of community, who came not just for the landscape and the house, but really wanted to make a difference and be part of a community. And they missed that community in the urban, and they wanted to contribute. And they became a member of associations. And they are often also valued because they have this, often they are highly educated because they can afford houses, that bring loads of experience, loads of networks, and know how to develop projects, to get leader money, and to get this kind of money, which is nice, but very often they also go to villages which were beautiful to start with. So they don't go to these mining villages where there is nothing in terms of amenities, or very little social, or very little educational capital. So the difference come bigger. What I have also seen in Spain is that sometimes newcomers are migrants from Morocco or from a different culture, which is not even digital nomads. But they really change, or our experience is changing the village, or in Italy, from Africa. Sometimes experienced as, or Albanians in Greece a long time ago, sometimes experienced as strangers, and then you can divide it, can have divided villages, but in some cases they also, when they participate, and when they reopen shops, when the schools can open again, and there was this example also in the south of Italy where the mayor, he was criminalized. So there, it is possible, but there it takes a lot of, I would say, maybe it takes this kind of hubs in terms of bringing people together, to learn together, to develop projects together, to not be experienced as a taking over. There's also, I had a master students doing research in Tuscany. I forgot the name of the place. Also a village with lots of migrants coming in. There is a very interesting Italian concept, restanza.
Ah, sì. Vito Tetti. Yes.
which is really, restanza means staying in a way, but it has also the notion of resistance. So in restanza is decide to stay, but it's also the decide to resist against forces that try to undermine a community or try to undermine the future. And in that village, they also had a center with all kind of creative center. It closed down because it had problems with it was also about refugees integration, and then the Italian politics changed and they had to close down. But they had like a theater, a teatro povero, so it's like a creative theater to bring people together in the village, which was existed, I think, from 40s or 30s, and they had also a history of integrating mental patients when the psychiatric clinics closed in Italy. So there are, I think you can have that function as a creative hub, but depending on what kind of circumstances you have to develop activities. And if the newcomers are very strange, or you experience a kind of cultural difficulty, then you have to maybe organize different kind of projects. And again, it's probably very important to start from what is there, instead of offering the regular kind of courses in, I don't know, English language, cooking. But the cooking is often thought of as a very good way to overcome cultural differences. I don't know if that answers your question.
Well, do you think that that is going to be a key factor in the future of development of rural areas? This counter-urban migrants, and now focusing more on this rural creative class, knowledge workers, remote workers.
So if what is going to be a coordinating factor?
If they are going to play an important factor in rural development of these areas.
These creative hubs, you mean?
The migrants.
Or the migrants?
The migrants, but I'm talking more on the creative class style of migrants, not the
Labor migrants.
international migrants that usually do more manual and low-skilled jobs. But in terms of bringing more innovation, higher income activities, etc., or it might be, because there's a lot of buzz, I feel, is yet to see if actually that is going to happen. And we've been hearing this for many years, and I don't think that has picked up. Maybe now after COVID and
It's a difficult question. I do think, but so I'm a very optimistic person, and I have the idea or the feeling that the experience of COVID has changed the vision of the rural at least a little bit, in the sense of it not being just hinterland, but attractive places. Again, you do see a selectivity in which places are considered as nice places to go to. And of course, one of the problems of the creative class is that they need digitalization. So the creative class, with the exception of a single traditional painter, won't have high-speed internet, which is already a selection. It's one of the things the European Union wants to invest in. Yeah, what I think is important is to recognize that rural areas are not hinterland, but are part of. In Dutch, you have also the term, it's dialect, ommeland, which is the land around you. Which has it could say it's just a different word, but it does have a different sense. So if it's the land around us, it's part of our land in terms of our responsibility, and then you can. It's also part of your horizon, where you could move or where you could be, and maybe you can be there and contribute, not just as a consumer, because that's the problem of space of consumption, is if you just eat it and you don't care what is left behind. But if it's a space of co-production and co-creation and responsibility, then it's different. I think it's it could have a future in an optimistic way if it is also a new way of life, not just for the singular artist and the singular person, and not just a life, not just a consumption, but more, You will find out.
Very last question. You
I have maybe easier question regarding the direction of research that you proposed. Could you go back to your last slide? So I'm wondering, I didn't quite fully get it, saying to have see the network more relational, but I wonder if you refer to shifting perspectives in our objective in research and how we see the position of nodes in this network, or do you refer more to trying to shift the position of nodes in network in reality?
I don't know if I understood your question. So it's about
unravel the moving relational web. You refer to change our perspective at who should be the objective in our research, who should be the main character in our research, or do you refer to more trying to move that in reality?
I think I meant it more in terms of research. So you have to, with that zooming in and zooming out, so you can zoom into local places and try to understand the dynamics in terms of civic initiatives or creative hubs and what they do to the place. But you need also to zoom out to see how that relates to what is happening elsewhere. And if positions are, if it helps to shift positions of the place in relation to other places.
Yeah, and I wonder if there's would there be some challenge to justify then in this way the network that we refer to in research, and then also the action network that's in reality? Like, for example, the political parties involved in one singular research may be different from the actual political parties involved in the movement of a place. And I wonder, in research, how do you justify your scope of network?
That's difficult to give a general answer to that question. What I find always very important is that you can explain the urgency of your question. So which question what is your question of research, and why is that your question of research? So what is the problem? I want to start with, what is the problem? What is it that you want to understand or change, and what do we know already? So if given that, you define your question with sub-questions, and that can very well be about a local phenomenon, because that is what so if you want to understand to what extent digital nomads contribute to the development of a place, to a community, you have to look into the places, probably to different places, and you have to select these different places. Maybe you need to take account of the network in order to select which places to compare. Or if you want to understand how creative hub functions, the same, so that you want to understand it in a place. But why this place? And often there are pragmatic reasons, because that's where you can, it's not too far, or whether you know somebody, or because they speak your language, or whatever. That's fine, but you need to also have some theoretical or problem-based reason. And there, the zooming out is important. So this, why comparing these places, or why focus on this particular place? Because it's a poor place, or if you just take a place, you need to understand how this place relates to other places and matters in terms of your problem. I don't know if that helps.
Yeah, it does. It sounds like a general question, but I think in the process of research,
Yeah.
so often that we have some reason, but then you find something else interesting, and then
Yeah, but again, I know that. So it's about you need to. So you should do your PhD on a question that you find interesting, because even 3 years can be boring if it doesn't interest you. And that's fine. Recognize that there are personal motives or pragmatic motives, but then try also to. You need also to be to justify it scientifically and so socially, I would. And that sometimes is also, you're very often, so if you have an academic mind and you're curious, there is generally a reason why you're curious. So it's not so personal or so, don't worry that it could not also matter theoretically or scientifically, but you need to figure that out to argue about it. And pragmatism is fine. Everybody needs to be pragmatic.
Okay. Thanks very much, Bettina.
Thank you.
We are about 20 minutes ahead of time, so let's say that we need 15 past 12 here for the next session. Okay?